Hi, I'm Mark Leopard. I'm a disabled member of the National Executive Committee and also a member of the TUC Disabled Workers Committee. In celebration of Disability History Month, I'm here today to interview Mark Serwotka, the General Secretary of PCS, about the work that PCS have been doing over the last few years on disabled issues and also what's planned for the future. Hi Mark. Thanks for taking the time to see us. Obviously, you've been a General Secretary for nearly 15 years now. I wondered if you could say some of the changes you've seen for disabled people over that time.
Could I start by saying, though, Mark, how much I'm pleased to be able to do this interview to show PCS's support for Disabled History Month, and also how grateful I am on behalf of PCS to yourself and all your colleagues who've done such really important work on disability issues, both within PCS, the civil service, and throughout the TUC. And certainly I'm proud that we have a union where these issues are taken up properly, and I'm proud of the role that our activists and disabled activists play. I mean, as you say, 15 years is a long time, and I'd like to be able to sit here and say, well, after 15 years things are so much better than they were, that disabled members don't have a problem because we live in a more enlightened society and the government and the employers take those issues seriously. But I can't say that, unfortunately. The experience that I get told about by our disabled members and by our representatives is one that actually things are getting worse in so many ways for disabled people. If I could highlight that really with two examples, one is the effect of the spending cuts. We live at a time of austerity where the government makes a political choice to cut public spending, and the effect on disabled people is massively disproportionate to everybody else. Whether that's people at work who see, for example, the closing of Remploy, who actually see that the pressures on them now under performance management systems or to deliver in a much more pressurized environment means that individuals are suffering through stress at work or mental health problems, or whether the enormous amount of time it often takes to get reasonable adjustments put in to workplaces so that disabled members can do the job in the way that they want to do it. It's really completely unacceptable. So at the world of work, I think things are getting tougher. And even though many employers have very good policies on paper, when it comes to getting those consistently delivered in workplaces, our members know how tough that is. And I've also seen a negative change, I think, in terms of the stereotypes and negative sort of things that are said about disabled people. That often stems from the government's approach in terms of social security and welfare, for example, where we've seen huge cuts in terms of welfare budgets. We see real issues for people who are being forced off benefits or having their benefits cut, where we see, for example, disabled people losing quite a high proportion of their benefits, which are already not high enough. We see the work capability assessment tests that are being used to stop people getting benefits that we believe they should be entitled to. And all of that is not only negative and unacceptable. Unfortunately, in PCS we've seen the stigmatisation takes you down a route that really is quite frightening.
Mark, do you have any examples of where disabled people have been treated badly?
Well, unfortunately, we do have a number of examples, really, and they range from individuals being abused. We have a PCS member who's a wheelchair user who has been abused in the street and been accused of being a scrounger and a burden on the welfare state. And when I hear that, my heart sinks, because how terrible must that have been for the individual? But what does it also say about a society in which the government is inadvertently encouraging people to believe that the person to blame here is the wheelchair user, rather than problems in terms of properly funding decent facilities and services for our disabled members. But there's some other examples, whether it's Lord Freud, the advisor to the government, for example, last year, questioning whether disabled people should actually get the national minimum wage, or whether it's the examples that we have of PCS members who have been sacked at work under punitive and draconian sick absence measures that do not take into account reasonable adjustments that should be made, or the difficulties that individuals have to cope with. And of course, there's the final example of the work capability assessments, where we have seen coroners now conclude that people have taken their own lives because of the harshness of the work capability assessment tests. And we know that there are thousands of people who have to deal with the reality every day of knowing their benefits could be reduced, benefits that are not high enough to start with. So that gives us a flavour, I think, what disabled people have to deal with. And our commitment as a union has to be to work with all those, particularly our disabled activists, to say we're going to campaign against this in the workplace, in society generally, to make a far more positive case.
And finally, Mark, PCS have long supported disabled activist-led campaigning groups like Disabled People Against the Cuts and Inclusion London, as well as many individual campaigns on social media. What are PCS's current campaigns around disability issues, and how can members get involved?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that one of the things that I'm proudest about in terms of PCS in recent years is the support we've given to campaigners who are really trying to do things on the ground. You mentioned Disabled People Against the Cuts, Black Triangle, for example. People who we've really liked working alongside and have supported, because at the end of the day, they are prepared to put themselves right out there to highlight the injustices that are taking place. And we've done that, whether we've supported those days of action against the work capability test, for example, whether or not we've been with campaigners against the government's austerity measures and attacks on social security. We've been very proud to do it. In fact, only 2 weeks ago I attended a conference that we put on with Unite's community section about social security, and many of those disabled activists were there, and it's a pleasure to show we want to work together, and I'm proud that we've done that. And I think that sometimes the direct action these groups have taken have done more to highlight the injustices they face than many long-term campaigns behind the scenes. And so our view has to be you support it all. So we support those groups in their campaigns. We want as a union to ensure that we can highlight what's going on during this History Month, but also to ensure that our representatives are well briefed in terms of issues at work around reasonable adjustments, issues to take into account with disability discrimination, that we can challenge why is it under performance management that such a high disproportionate level of people with disabilities are in the lower end of box markings and so few make it to the very top of the civil service. So there's lots of ways we can help practically at work, ensuring our reps have the arguments and that they are well able to challenge the employer, that we take our place publicly to campaign with organisations, whether that's in Parliament or whether that's actually on demonstrations. And finally, that we as a union commit to say that we've got to ensure we do this ourselves. We've got to build our equality networks. We've got to ensure that our disabled members and activists feel that they've got democratic forums that they can get involved in to help ensure that the policies that the union develops are ones that are very much centred around what disabled members say the union should be doing. I think if we do all of that, it means we can play a small but important part to say that let's use sort of Disability History Month to highlight these issues, to dedicate ourselves to campaign against all of these injustices, and most importantly say, as a union, we want disabled members of staff to join us, be part of our campaigns, shape our policy, so that we can play our part in the wider society to challenge the disgraceful events that we've talked about in this interview. The reality is disabled people are not a burden on the welfare state, that we should treasure the contributions that everybody can make. We should recognise that people in different ways can make very positive contributions, and that means accepting there's nothing wrong with having proper support mechanisms so that people can be at work. There was nothing wrong with Remploy, which was disgracefully cut by the government. There's nothing wrong with the Independent Living Fund. It's something that we should have cherished, not have to fight to preserve. All of these things the government are doing, if you sit back and look at them individually, most fair-minded people would say, gosh, that's a disgrace. But the government's created this agenda where many people actually think what's happening is right, because they think we have to have austerity and times are tough. And our job has to be to say austerity is a political choice, not an economic choice, that we should treat people far better than this, and that we should be for people having real dignity at work and being supported in whichever way we can. And that means, I think, opposing the disgraceful cuts to welfare, the disgraceful cuts to social security, the work capability assessments, for example, should go. And we should also say that in work, it's about time the employers and the government started supporting people so they can contribute at work, rather than in many cases helping to drive people out of the workplace, which frankly is completely unacceptable.
Okay, Mark, thanks a lot for taking time out of your busy day to speak to me. I'm sure our members will appreciate to hear you on these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.